We hope you enjoy Who's for a Tea Party? Every Revolution Has Its Ghost by Rachel Lawson. England, 1773. Good evening, Dr. and Mrs. Alexander. What brings you to my humble cafe tonight? The owner beamed at them, wiping his hands on his apron. They were his favourite customers, polite, elegant, and unfailingly kind. Your excellent tea, said Dr. Blake Alexander, bowing his head with a gentleman's grace. His coat was finely cut, his boots polished, his manner warm. The usual? The owner asked. Yes, please, Angela said, smiling in that soft way that made Blake's heart settle. The cafe owner hurried off to fetch the tea and warm milk. The room glowed with candlelight, the air rich with the scent of bergamot and baked bread. Blake reached across the small table and brushed Angela's fingers with his own, a quiet ritual between them. For a moment, the world was gentle, and then it wouldn't be. Blake and Angela sat close together, hands brushing as they lifted their cups. They were halfway through their tea when the door banged open. A group of roughly clad soldiers stomped inside, boots muddy, coats unbuttoned, eyes scanning the room with the hungry look of men on a mission. Conversations faltered, chairs scraped. Everyone knew what they were. A press gang. Their sergeant pointed toward the hearth where a burly, half-drunk man slumped over his tankard. Blake recognized him instantly, a patient he had treated more than once for fevers and injuries. The soldiers moved toward the man. Angela felt Blake tense beside her. Don't, she whispered. But Blake was already rising. He's not fit for service, Blake said, stepping between the soldiers and the man. He's ill. He needs rest, not a musket. The sergeant looked Blake up and down, the fine coat, the clean boots, the strong shoulders. Well now, the sergeant said with a grin. Look at this one. The others murmured in agreement. A doctor, is it? Aye, and young. Healthy too. Blake realized his mistake too late. Angela grabbed his arm. Please, he's my husband. Leave him be. The sergeant laughed, a short, cruel sound. The king needs men, madam, and your husband looks a far better recruit than that drunk by the fire. Two soldiers seized Blake by the arms. Wait, Angela cried, trying to pull him back. Blake twisted toward her, trying to reassure her, but the soldiers were already dragging him toward the door. Your husband is a soldier now, the sergeant said, tipping his hat mockingly as Angela pleaded. Blake's teacup toppled from the table, shattering on the floor. The scent of spilled tea rose around them as he was taken. The pressed men were herded onto the transport ship like cattle, shoved below decks with barely room to breathe. Blake stood among them, wrists raw from the ropes, staring back at the shrinking coastline of England. Somewhere beyond the mist was Angela, his wife, his life, growing smaller with every wave. He felt the loss like a physical wound. The ship lurched, sails cracking in the wind, as it turned westward toward the Americas. The men around him muttered prayers, curses, or nothing at all. They all knew what they were being sent to be. Cannon fodder. Boston, the Americas, months later. When the ship finally reached Boston, the new recruits were marched off the gangplank and lined up before their assigned regiment. Officers watched them with the cold appraisal one might give livestock. Captain Silas Blackthorne stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He studied each man in turn until his gaze caught on Blake. Who is that young private? Blackthorne asked quietly. The one with the airs of a gentleman. Blake stood rigid, but his eyes betrayed him, fixed on the distant horizon where England had vanished. Lieutenant Grey, the second in command, stepped forward. He was pressed, sir. Name's Private Alexander. Blackthorne's brow lifted. Pressed? What was he before? A gentleman and a doctor in London, Grey replied. Blackthorne considered this, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. Good to know. On campaign, it will be useful to have someone medically trained. Blake said nothing. He felt the words like chains tightening around him. He was no longer Dr. Blake Alexander. He was Private Alexander, property of the Crown, and the man who had just spoken his fate aloud was Captain Silas Blackthorne. "Thank you for your help with my wound, Private Alexander. The regiment medic couldn't do anything for me," said one of the pressed men, flexing his newly bandaged arm. "You're very welcome. It was only a minor infection," Blake replied. "He's trained as a butcher, not a doctor. His idea of healing is luck and chopping off limbs." He said it lightly, but there was truth beneath the humour. Blake was older than he looked, far older, and knew more of medicine than any man in the century. 1,000 years of practice, and none of it, he could admit, not here, not now, not while pretending to be human, powerless, and ordinary. "Yes, well, thank you," the man said again, grateful. The mess hall was nearly empty when Lieutenant Gray strode in. "There you are, Private Alexander," Gray said. Blake straightened. "Yes, sir." "The captain wants to speak with you." Blake's stomach tightened. "Where is he, sir?" Gray hesitated. "He's very angry." That did nothing to calm Blake's nerves. Gray escorted him to the captain's office. Blackthorne stood behind his desk, rifling through a folder with a scowl. When they entered, he dismissed Gray with a curt gesture, leaving Blake alone with him. "I hear you've been treating people as a doctor again," Blackthorne snapped. Blake swallowed. "Is there something wrong with that, sir? I've had complaints." "Why? No one died. No one was harmed." "You cured them," Blackthorne said sharply. Blake blinked. "Why are you complaining then?" Blackthorne slammed the folder shut. "You've been accused of using witchcraft by the regiment's medic. I will have no witches or witchcraft in the King's army, Private." Blake's jaw tightened. "It's not witch anything. It's medicine, science. He's a bad doctor, sir. Jealous. They don't call him Dr. Hook for nothing. He doesn't treat infections. He waits until they rot and then lops off the limb." Blackthorne's expression didn't soften. "Still, I cannot have rumours that the King's army shelters witches. The locals are rebellious enough without soldiers swinging from gallows for sorcery." Blake stared at him. "Do you think I look like a witch?" "No," Blackthorne said plainly. "I don't believe in witches." "Then what are you going to do?" Blackthorne exhaled slowly. "It depends on what you do." Blake frowned. "Why?" "I made the medic promise not to speak of his suspicions. He agreed on one condition." Blake felt the dread rise. "What condition?" "That you do not practice, whatever you practice, in the army again," Blackthorne said quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. "I'm a doctor," Blake said, voice cracking. "I took an oath. I can't just stop helping people." "I understand your feelings," Blackthorne said, though his tone suggested he did not. "But they are only feelings. Would you prefer the alternative?" Blake's breath caught. The alternative was hanging. "No," he whispered. "Then promise me," Blackthorne said. "Promise you won't act as a doctor." Blake's throat tightened. "I promise." "I'll hold you to that promise," Blackthorne said. "You may go, Private." Blake saluted, turned, and left the office. He made it only a few steps down the corridor before he found a dark corner, leaned against the wall, and let the tears come. He had lost his name, his freedom, his wife, and now, the last piece of himself. Later, when the mess hall was empty, Blake slipped back inside, hoping for a moment of quiet. He still felt raw from Blackthorne's warning, the promise he'd been forced to make, the oath he'd been forced to break. He barely had time to sit before a shadow fell across the table. Dr. Hook. The regiment's medic stood over him, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd won. "So," Hook said, voice oily, "the captain had words with you." Blake didn't look up. He did. Hook clicked his tongue. "I warned you, Private. You think you're better than me. You think you know more than me." Blake finally met his eyes. "I don't think it. I know it." Hook's face flushed an ugly red. "You're a pressed man, a nobody. and you've been making me look a fool in front of the regiment." "I've been helping people," Blake said quietly. "That's all." Hook leaned in, breath sour with ale. "You've been showing me up, and I won't have it." Blake's voice stayed calm, but his hands curled into fists beneath the table. "If you treated infections instead of waiting for them to rot, no one would need my help." Hook slammed his hand on the table, making Blake flinch. "You listen to me, Alexander. I know what you are." Blake froze. Hook smiled, a thin, triumphant thing. "No one cures infections that fast. No one knows what you know. You're not natural." Blake's pulse hammered. "I'm a doctor." "You're a witch," Hook hissed. Blake stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Say that again." Hook stepped back, startled by the sudden fire in Blake's eyes. "The captain believes me. He told you to stop, didn't he? One more complaint, and you'll swing." Blake swallowed hard. "I'm not a witch." Hook smirked. "Doesn't matter what you are. Only matters what people think you are." He leaned in again, voice low and venomous. "And right now, Private Alexander, they think you're dangerous." Blake's jaw clenched. "I save lives. That's all." Hook shrugged. "Not anymore. You're done. You so much as touch another bandage, and I'll see you hanging from a rope." He turned and walked away, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Blake stood alone in the mess hall, shaking with fury and fear. He had lived 1,000 years. He had survived empires, plagues, and wars. But here, in this century, in this uniform, he was powerless, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt trapped. Blake had heard the stories long before he arrived in Boston. The taxes, the protests, the blood spilled in the streets. The locals felt wronged, the crown felt disobeyed, and the tension hung in the air like a powder keg waiting for a spark. It only worsened after the East India Company became the sole legal importer of tea. Smuggling exploded. Blake's regiment was assigned to crack down on the contraband trade, smashing crates, raiding warehouses, and arresting smugglers. Blake did his duty. He always did. Until the day he tasted the smuggled tea. He'd expected it to be foul, like the stale, bitter legal tea the army served. Instead, it was fresh, fragrant, alive. Dutch tea, real tea, the kind he hadn't tasted since England. It became his guilty secret. Whenever he could slip away, he changed into civilian clothes, vanished into the city, and found a quiet cafe that served the good stuff. For a few stolen minutes, he felt human again. One night, on his way back, he found a man slumped in an alley, clutching his side. A pistol lay beside him, the mark of a smuggler. "Help me," the man gasped. Blake froze. "I can't." "Why?" "I promised I wouldn't. I can't risk it." The man's eyes pleaded with him. Blake felt the oath he'd sworn, the real one, the ancient one, twisting inside him like a knife. "Oh, damn it," Blake muttered. "Do you have somewhere I can operate? I'm a surgeon. I can help you." The smuggler nodded weakly. Blake was led to a safe house hidden behind a shuttered shop. By candlelight, he removed the bullet with steady hands, gave instructions to the smuggler's friends, and slipped out before dawn. He returned to the small house he rented, washed the blood from his hands, changed back into his uniform, and teleported into a broom closet in the barracks. A trick only a real witch could manage. He stepped out, smoothing his coat, trying to look composed. Dr. Hook was standing in the corridor, staring at him, suspicion sharp as a blade. Blake's heart lurched, but he bowed politely, forced a smile, and walked past as if nothing were amiss. Hook's eyes followed him the whole way. Blake returned to the smuggler's safe house the next evening, slipping through the back door with the ease of someone who had done this too many times already. His patient was sitting up, colour returning to his cheeks. "You're healing well," Blake said, checking the bandage. "Thanks to you." the man replied, smiling gratefully. Blake nodded, relieved and guilty. He had promised Blackthorne he would stop. He had promised himself he would stay invisible. And yet here he was again, breaking both vows. He left the safe house and headed toward the small room he rented in town. The streets were quiet, the lamps guttering in the wind. Blake kept his head down, coat pulled tight. Halfway home, he felt it, a presence behind him, a rhythm of footsteps matching his own, someone following. Blake stopped and turned sharply. A man stepped out of the shadows, not a soldier, not a smuggler, but someone who moved with purpose. "Who are you?" Blake demanded. "Why are you following me?" The man didn't flinch. "The question is not who I am. The question is who you are, Private, and why you're meeting smugglers and frequenting cafes that serve contraband tea." Blake's breath caught. "Private." The man smiled faintly. "Don't pretend. We've been watching you." Blake's eyes widened. "Who are you? Why are you following me?" "Looking for someone like you," the man said. Blake felt the cold edge of fear. "Why?" "Because we're looking for an ally, and we think we've found one." "I'm not so sure of that," Blake said, voice tight. The man's expression hardened. "If you aren't, we know enough to have you hung, Private Alexander." Blake's stomach dropped. They knew his name. They knew his rank. They knew his movements. He was trapped. "Who are we?" Blake whispered. The man stepped closer, confidence radiating off him like heat. "The Sons of Liberty, and whether you like it or not, you're our newest recruit." Blake's heart pounded. He looked terrified. And the man smiled, because fear meant leverage, and leverage meant control. As the months passed, rumors spread through Boston like wildfire, whispers of a mysterious new leader of the Sons of Liberty, a figure who appeared and vanished like smoke, who healed the wounded, sabotaged British plans, and moved through the night unseen. They called him many things. The ghost of liberty. Each name filled the patriots with awe and pride, and filled the English with fear, anger, and loathing. He seemed to know what the British would do before they did. He was a growing thorn in the king's side, and a shadow the soldiers could never catch. Until one day, Captain Blackthorne stood before the assembled troops, hands clasped behind his back, expression carved from stone. "There is talk in the city," he said. "A new rebel leader, a man who moves unseen, a man who heals the wounded and stirs the people to defiance." The soldiers shifted uneasily. "He calls himself the Ghost of Liberty," Blackthorne continued. "A doctor, they say, clever, dangerous, and very good at disappearing." Blake felt his stomach drop. Blackthorne's eyes swept the ranks. "Keep watch. If you see anything, anyone, matching that description, you report it immediately. This ghost will be found." Blake kept his face still, but inside, panic clawed at him. They were hunting him, and they didn't even know it. "Private Alexander, I need a word with you," Captain Blackthorne said, stopping Blake as he passed. Blake halted immediately. "Yes, sir. I'm here." Blackthorne lowered his voice. "Have you heard anything from that smuggler we caught? Anything about this ghost?" Blake forced his expression to stay neutral. "Nothing, sir. Only that he thinks the ghost is a rogue soldier." Blackthorne nodded slowly. "I suspected as much myself. Whoever he is, he knows our plans too well, too precisely. That means he's working under me." Blake swallowed. "Any ideas who he could be? I can keep an eye on them." "Gray," Blackthorne said without hesitation. Blake blinked. "You suspect him?" "Captain," Lieutenant Gray said suddenly, appearing behind Blake like a phantom. Blake nearly jumped out of his skin. Blackthorne sighed. "No, he's no more a doctor than our medic. What is it, Gray?" "We have a ghost witness," Gray said. Blake's stomach dropped. Blackthorne straightened. Take them to my office." Then he turned to Blake. "Come with me, Private. I'll show you how to get answers." Blake forced himself to nod, though dread coiled in his gut. He followed Blackthorne toward the office, each step heavier than the last, while Gray went to fetch the witness. Blake had never felt more trapped. Later, in Captain Blackthorne's office, the Dutch tea smuggler sat stiffly in a chair, hands bound, eyes darting between the captain and Blake. Blake stood to the side with a notebook, trying to look calm. "What did this rebel ghost look like?" Blackthorne asked. The smuggler squinted at Blake, then at the captain. "Tall, about his height. Same weight, same shape." Blake froze mid-sentence, quill hovering above the page. Blackthorne frowned. "Are you saying it's him?" "I don't know," the smuggler said quickly. "The ghost was masked. I never saw his face." His English carried a thick Dutch accent. Blake forced a dry, unimpressed tone. "I am not masquerading as anyone, sir." "That one's still hanging," Blackthorne warned. "So long as it's not me hanging, I'm happy," Blake muttered. The smuggler's eyes flicked to him, and he winked. Blake kept his face perfectly still. Blackthorne leaned forward. "Is there anything else you can say?" His voice, was it light or deep? He didn't speak. The smuggler lied smoothly. Blackthorne grunted, dissatisfied, but accepting it. "Very well, we'll make a likeness." He gestured for Blake to stand. Blake obeyed, heart pounding, as the smuggler described the ghost's build, posture, and height, all while looking directly at him. A sketch was made, a wanted poster drafted. Blake held the parchment steady while the artist worked, and no one in the room realized the model for the ghost of liberty was the ghost himself. "Captain, I have come to identify a traitor in our midst," Dr. Hook announced, barging into Blackthorne's office without knocking. Blackthorne didn't even look up from his papers. "Fine. Who is it this time?" "Private Alexander," Hook declared triumphantly. Blackthorne groaned. "Oh, him again? What has he done now?" "He's the ghost of liberty," Hook said, puffing up with self-importance. "I know," Blackthorne said flatly. Hook blinked. "You know?" "He posed for the wanted poster," Blackthorne said, waving a hand dismissively. "It was either him or Lieutenant Gray. They look like twins." Hook hesitated. "Well, yes, they do resemble each other." "Is that your only evidence? That he looks like the sketch?" Blackthorne asked, finally lifting his eyes. Hook straightened. "The private is also a doctor, like the ghost." "Yes," Blackthorne said dryly. "So is Lieutenant Gray." But, Hook sputtered. Blackthorne slammed the folder shut. "You just want to get rid of the private. Stop wasting my time." He stood, pointed at the door, and herded Hook out like an unwanted dog. The door shut firmly behind him. Blake, who had been standing quietly in the corner the entire time, exhaled very slowly. He had just survived another accusation, not because he was innocent, but because Hook was an idiot and Blackthorne was tired. "He's crazy, Private. I need a moment. You can go," Blackthorne said, rubbing his temples. "I understand," Blake replied quietly. Blake stepped out of the captain's office, closing the door gently behind him. He let out a slow breath, the kind a man releases only after narrowly avoiding a noose. He turned. Gray was standing in the corridor, not blocking his way, not speaking, just watching him. A cool, assessing stare, the kind an officer gives a man who doesn't quite add up. Blake forced a polite nod. "Lieutenant." Gray didn't return it. His eyes flicked over Blake's face, his posture, the tension in his shoulders, as if cataloguing every detail. "You seem nervous, Private," Gray said softly. Blake's heart lurched. "Long day, sir." Gray hummed, unconvinced. He stepped aside, but his gaze followed Blake like a shadow. Blake walked past him, spine stiff, trying not to look like a man who had just helped design his own wanted poster. He reached the end of the corridor and glanced toward the window. Dr. Hook was outside. pressed against the glass, staring in at him like a feral cat that had spotted a mouse. His eyes were wide, wild, gleaming with vindication, or madness, or both. His breath fogged the window pane as he glared at Blake with unfiltered hatred. Blake froze. Hook's lips moved silently. "I know." Blake swallowed hard, turned away, and kept walking, calm on the outside, panic clawing at him on the inside. He had survived the captain, he had survived the witness, but Gray was watching him, and Hook was hunting him. Blackthorn rubbed his temples after Hook and Blake left, muttering something about idiots and their obsessions. He needed a moment of quiet, a moment to think, but quiet never lasted long in the barracks. He stepped out of his office and into the soldiers' quarters, intending only to check the duty roster. As he passed Blake's bunk, something caught his eye, a corner of paper sticking out from beneath the pillow. Blackthorn frowned. Blake was meticulous, too meticulous to leave something half-hidden. He reached down and pulled the paper free. A pamphlet, bold letters across the top. "Liberty is the right of all men." Blackthorn's jaw tightened. A rebel pamphlet, in his barracks, on a private's bed. He flipped it open. The language was fiery, impassioned, the kind that stirred crowds, the kind the ghost of liberty was said to distribute. Blackthorn exhaled slowly. "Damn it, Alexander. What are you doing?" He looked around. No one else was in the room. He slid the pamphlet back under the pillow exactly where he'd found it. Then he straightened, expression unreadable. He had dismissed Hook too quickly, too easily. Blake was a good soldier, quiet, obedient, competent. But he was also strange, too educated, too calm under pressure, too something. And now this. Blackthorn stepped back, eyes narrowing. He wasn't ready to accuse. Not yet, but he would be watching, very closely. Later that day, the Sons of Liberty were already gathering in the warehouse when Blake slipped inside, hood up, breath misting in the cold air. He hadn't come to lead anything. He'd only come to warn them. "The patrol routes changed," Blake said quietly. "You have less time than you think." But the moment the words left his mouth, panic erupted. "They're coming now? We're not ready. We'll be caught. Where's the plan?" Men scrambled for masks, feathers, blankets, anything to complete their disguises. Crates toppled. Someone dropped a hatchet. Another man was shaking so hard he couldn't tie his mask. Blake raised both hands. "Stop. Breathe." The room stilled. Not because he shouted, not because he commanded, but because he sounded calm when everyone else was drowning. "Listen," Blake said, voice steady. "You have minutes, not hours. Move in pairs. Board from the starboard side. Don't harm the crew. Dump only the tea. Fast and clean. Go." He meant it as advice. They took it as orders. And suddenly Blake was at the front of the group, cloak snapping in the wind, mask shadowing his face. The Sons of Liberty followed him down the wharf like he was a general leading troops into battle. He boarded the Dartmouth first, moving with a surgeon's precision. He broke open the first crate. Tea spilled like dark sand. The men cheered and followed his lead. Blake hadn't meant to start it. He hadn't meant to lead it, but he was the first man on the deck, the first to break a crate, the first to throw the tea into the harbour. He looked heroic. He looked in control. He looked like the ghost of liberty. Lieutenant Gray reached the wharf at a run, lantern in hand, expecting smugglers or drunks. What he saw instead made him stop dead. A masked figure stood on the deck, illuminated by lantern light and moonshine. Tall, lean, familiar. He moved with Blake's posture, that strange, quiet grace, the way he held his shoulders, the way he turned his head. Gray's breath caught. "Private," he whispered. Blake didn't hear him. He was too busy directing men, steadying nerves, keeping the operation from collapsing. He looked nothing like the timid private who bowed to officers. He looked like a commander. Gray's heart pounded. He should shout. He should call for the captain. He should stop this. But he didn't. He watched. He watched Blake turn chaos into order. He watched him protect the crew instead of harming them. He watched him lead a rebellion with more honor than most officers led a regiment. Gray lowered his lantern. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what he should do. Betray him, protect him, pretend he saw nothing. He only knew one thing. Blake Alexander was not who he claimed to be. And Gray wasn't sure if that made him dangerous or extraordinary. Later that night, Blackthorne stood at the center of the barracks, the rebel pamphlet pinched between two fingers, as if it were something foul. "Private Alexander," he said, voice low and dangerous, "care to explain why this was under your pillow?" Blake's blood ran cold. Before he could speak, Gray stepped forward. "Captain," Gray said calmly, "I put it there." Blake's head snapped toward him. Blackthorne frowned. "You?" Gray nodded, expression unreadable. "I confiscated it from a civilian earlier. I meant to burn it, but I was called away. I tucked it under the nearest pillow without." Thinking, Blackthorne stared at him, weighing the words. Gray didn't blink. Finally, the captain grunted. "Very well. But be more careful. I won't have rebel trash in my barracks." "Yes, sir," Gray said. Blackthorne turned to Blake. "And you, Private, I expect better vigilance. You're loyal to the Crown, aren't you?" Blake swallowed. "Of course, sir." Gray spoke again, voice steady. "I've never met a more loyal patriot to the Crown than Private Alexander." Blackthorne nodded, satisfied. "Good. See that it stays that way." He strode out, leaving the two men alone. The door clicked shut. Silence. Gray didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned to Blake, eyes sharp, voice low. "What?" he said. "Were you doing leading a riot?" Blake's breath caught. I wasn't." Gray stepped closer, not threatening, not angry, but intense. "I saw you," he said, "on the Dartmouth, masked, calm, commanding. You turned chaos into order. You led them." Blake's heart hammered. "Gray, don't lie to me," Gray said softly. "Not after I just lied for you." Blake froze. Gray exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you are. I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know whether I should report you or protect you." He looked at Blake, really looked at him. "You're not the man you pretend to be," Gray said. "But you're not the villain Hook thinks you are either." Blake swallowed hard. "So what now?" Gray shook his head. "I don't know." He stepped back, conflicted, torn between duty and something else, respect maybe, or fear, or admiration. "But I do know this," Gray said quietly. "If Blackthorne finds out what I saw, you'll hang." Blake's stomach twisted. Gray held his gaze. "So tell me, Private Alexander, what are you really doing?" Gray waited for Blake to answer. Blake tried, he really did. But fear hit him so hard his control slipped. A single tear slid down his cheek, except it wasn't water, it was blue fire. Gray recoiled as the flame cooled midair, crystallizing into a perfect blue star sapphire that chimed softly as it hit the floor. Gray stared at it, then at Blake. "What are you?" Gray whispered, voice shaking. Blake's throat tightened. "Not human." Gray swallowed hard. "I see that." Blake wiped his cheek, another ember tear threatening to fall. "They threatened to reveal me if I didn't work with them." Gray's eyes narrowed. "What as?" "A doctor," Blake said. "I helped an injured man." Gray blinked. "What's wrong with that?" "He was a smuggler," Blake said, voice cracking. "I didn't care about his business. I cared about his health. I shouldn't have. I promised not to practice medicine." Gray's brows drew together. "Who did you promise?" "Dr. Hook and the captain," Blake whispered. "Either I stop doctoring or I'm accused of being a witch. Hook is jealous. He hates that I'm a better doctor. He doesn't know what I am." Another tear of blue fire fell, turning into a gem at Blake's feet. "Please don't tell them," Blake begged. "I'll hang. Everyone threatens to reveal me. Everyone says they'll see me hanged if I don't do what they want." Gray stared at the gems on the floor, then at Blake, trembling, terrified, glowing faintly with inhuman sorrow. Gray exhaled slowly. He didn't know what Blake was. He didn't understand it. He wasn't sure he wanted to. But he knew one thing. Blake had more enemies than any man deserved, and Gray wasn't going to become another one. "Private," Gray said quietly, voice steadier now. "You don't need me threatening you too." Blake looked up, eyes bright with fire. Gray shook his head. "You're strange. You're dangerous. You're something else entirely. But you're not my enemy." He bent down, picked up the sapphire and pressed it into Blake's hand. "Your secret stays with me." Dr. Hook slammed into Blackthorn's office so hard the door bounced off the wall. "Captain, I've seen him. I've seen the ghost of liberty." Blackthorn didn't look up from his paperwork. "If you say Private Alexander again, I will personally throw you out the window." Hook's face flushed. "It is Private Alexander," Blackthorn groaned. "Hook, I saw him," Hook insisted, voice cracking with excitement. "On the Dartmouth, during the tea riot. He was bossing around the Sons of Liberty like he owned them." Blackthorn finally looked up. Slowly, very slowly. "Bossing around the Sons of Liberty," he repeated. "Yes," Hook said, nodding frantically. "Ordering them, leading them." He was on the deck, shouting commands, smashing crates, directing the whole operation. Blackthorn stared at him for a long, painful moment. Then, "Hook, you were drunk." "I was not drunk." "You are always drunk," Hook sputtered. "I know what I saw." Blackthorn leaned back in his chair, expression flat. "You saw a masked rebel in the dark, on a ship, in a riot, and decided it was the private you hate." "It was him," Hook insisted. "He moved like him, stood like him, Blackthorn cut him off. "Hook, half the men in this regiment are the same height and build, and the other half look like Lieutenant Gray." Hook blinked. "Gray?" "Yes, Gray," Blackthorn said, "who is also tall, lean, and moves like a gentleman, and unlike you, he can walk in a straight line after sunset." Hook's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Blackthorn sighed. "Do you have any evidence that isn't he looked like him?" Hook hesitated. "Well, no, but—" "Out," Blackthorn said, pointing at the door. "But out!" Hook stomped out, muttering curses. The door shut. Silence. Blackthorn rubbed his temples. Then his eyes narrowed, because Hook was a fool. But he wasn't always wrong. And Blake had been acting strangely, and there had been that pamphlet under his pillow. And the ghost was a doctor, and the ghost did know their patrol routes. And the ghost did move like a trained gentleman. Blackthorn exhaled slowly. "Damn it, Alexander. What are you doing?" Blake was halfway across the yard when he heard it. "Private Alexander." A word. Blackthorn's voice, calm, too calm. Blake turned, saluted. "Yes, sir." Blackthorn studied him for a long moment, not with suspicion, but with the cold, analytical interest of a man examining a puzzle piece that suddenly doesn't fit. "Walk with me," he said. They crossed the yard in silence. Blake's stomach tightened with every step. Blackthorn stopped beside the notice board where the new Ghost of Liberty wanted poster hung, the one Blake had accidentally modelled for. "Tell me, Private," Blackthorn said lightly. "What do you make of this ghost fellow?" Blake kept his face still. "A criminal, sir." Blackthorn's eyes didn't leave him. "Some say he's a soldier, someone with discipline, training, medical knowledge." Blake's pulse hammered. Blackthorn continued, voice mild. "Someone who knows our patrol routes, our weaknesses, someone who can move unseen." Blake swallowed. "Sounds like a dangerous man, sir." Blackthorn nodded slowly. "Indeed." He stepped closer, not threatening, but close enough that Blake felt the weight of his scrutiny. "Tell me, Private, if you were this ghost, how would you avoid capture?" Blake froze. That was the test, not an accusation. A trap disguised as curiosity. He forced himself to breathe. "I wouldn't know, sir." Blackthorn's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "Wouldn't you?" Blake held his ground. "No, sir." Blackthorn studied him for a long, silent moment. Then he smiled. A small, sharp, unsettling smile. "Good," he said, "because I'd hate to think one of my men was capable of such initiative." He turned and walked away. Blake stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding. Blackthorn hadn't accused him. He hadn't threatened him. He hadn't even raised his voice. But Blake knew. The captain was watching him now, very closely. Blake didn't realize he was shaking until he reached the far end of the yard and leaned against the stone wall, breath shallow, hands trembling. Blackthorn's casual questions still echoed in his skull. "If you were this ghost, how would you avoid capture?" He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady himself. "Private." Blake flinched. Gray stood a few paces away, arms folded, expression unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp, taking in every tremor, every flicker of panic. "You're pale," Gray said quietly. "And you're shaking." Blake straightened. "I'm fine, sir." Gray stepped closer. "No, you're not." Blake swallowed hard. It was just a conversation. Gray's jaw tightened. With Captain Blackthorn, about the ghost, while standing in front of a wanted poster that looks exactly like you. Blake looked away. Gray exhaled slowly. "What did he say?" "Nothing," Blake whispered. "He just asked questions." Gray studied him for a long moment. "He was testing you." Blake's breath hitched. Gray stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And you know it." Blake closed his eyes. "I didn't give anything away." "No," Gray said, "but you're rattled, badly." Blake didn't answer. Gray hesitated, then softened, just a fraction. "You're not good at hiding fear, Private. Not from me." Blake's voice cracked. "I'm trying." Gray looked at him, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. Concern, frustration, a flicker of protectiveness he didn't want to admit. "What did you think he was going to do?" Gray asked quietly. Blake swallowed. "Accuse me." Gray shook his head. "If he suspected you, he wouldn't test you. He'd arrest you." Blake's eyes widened. "That's not comforting." Gray huffed a breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "No, but it's the truth." He stepped even closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Blake, you need to be more careful." Blake's throat tightened. "I know." Gray's gaze softened again, reluctantly, like he hated that he cared. "I'm not your enemy," he said, "but Blackthorn is watching you now, and Hook is hunting you, and you—" He stopped himself. Blake looked up. "And I—" "What?" Gray held his gaze, conflicted, torn. "And you're not built for lying," Gray said quietly. "You're too honest, too human." Blake flinched at the word. Gray noticed, and his expression changed. Not suspicion, understanding, fear, and something like loyalty. "Come on," Gray said softly. "Walk with me, before someone else notices you're falling apart." Blake nodded, grateful and terrified all at once. And Gray walked beside him, not as an officer escorting a private, but as a man trying to protect someone he shouldn't care about. Hook had been sulking behind the supply shed, nursing his wounded pride and a flask of cheap rum when he saw them. Gray and Blake, walking together, too close, too quietly, too conspiratorially. Hook froze, eyes narrowing. He ducked behind a stack of crates, leaning forward like a starving fox watching two plump hens. Gray's voice drifted over, low and urgent. "You need to be more careful." Blake's reply was barely audible. "I know." Hook's eyes widened. "Careful? About what?" Gray stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "Blackthorn is watching you. Hook is hunting you. And you—" He stopped himself. Blake whispered, "And I what?" Gray hesitated. "You're not built for lying." Hook's jaw dropped. "Lying? About what? To whom?" Gray placed a steadying hand on Blake's shoulder. Hook nearly choked. "They're in league. They're in league." He pressed himself flatter against the crates, heart pounding with triumphant terror. Gray leaned in, voice barely above a breath. You're not alone in this. Hook's mouth fell open. Not alone? Not alone? He clapped a hand over his own mouth to keep from gasping aloud. Blake whispered, "Thank you." Gray nodded once. "We'll talk more later, somewhere private." Hook's eyes bulged. Private! Private! He stumbled backward, tripping over a bucket and barely catching himself before it clattered. He didn't hear the rest. He didn't need to. His mind was already racing, stitching together a tapestry of paranoia and certainty. Gray, the captain's right hand, had been turned, recruited, converted, corrupted, by Blake, by the ghost. Hook's breath came fast and shallow. Oh, this is big," he whispered to himself. "This is treason, treason in the officer corps." He staggered away, wild-eyed, clutching his coat like a man carrying a holy relic. "I knew it," he hissed. "I knew it. Blake's not just a witch. He's building an army." He spun around, nearly slipping in the mud. "I have to tell the captain. I have to tell him now." He sprinted toward Blackthorn's office, boots slapping the ground, hair flying, looking every bit the mad prophet he was. Behind him, Blake and Gray walked on, unaware. Unaware that Hook had just declared war. Unaware that he now believed the Ghost of Liberty had recruited Lieutenant Gray. Unaware that Hook was about to make everything 10 times worse. Blackthorn had just settled behind his desk with a cup of bitter army tea when the door exploded inward. "Captain!" Hook shrieked. Blackthorn closed his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake!" Hook stumbled in, hair wild, coat half-buttoned, eyes bulging with manic triumph. "I have news," he cried. Blackthorn didn't look up. "If it's about Private Alexander again, I swear, it is about Private Alexander." Blackthorn set his cup down very slowly. "Hook," he said, voice dangerously calm. "If you accuse that man of witchcraft, treason, or ghosthood one, more time." "It's worse than that," Hook shouted. Blackthorn blinked. "Worse?" Hook nodded violently. "Much worse." Blackthorn sighed. "Fine, entertain me." Hook leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "Private Alexander has recruited Lieutenant Gray into the Sons of Liberty." Blackthorn stared at him. Hook beamed, waiting for praise. Blackthorn rubbed his temples. "Hook, Gray is my second in command." "I know," Hook said, delighted. "Isn't it shocking?" "No," Blackthorn said flatly. "What's shocking is that you think I'll believe this." Hook stomped his foot. "I saw them, whispering, plotting. Gray told him he wasn't alone. He said they needed to meet somewhere private. It's treason, Captain." Blackthorn inhaled slowly through his nose. "Hook," he said, "Gray is the most loyal officer I have." Hook shook his head wildly. "Not anymore. Blake has turned him, corrupted him, seduced him with rebel lies." Blackthorn's eye twitched. "Seduced?" "Yes," Hook cried. "He's building an army, a secret army, inside your regiment." Blackthorn stood. Hook took this as validation. "It's true," he insisted. "I saw it with my own eyes." Blackthorn walked around the desk, stopped in front of Hook and placed both hands on the man's shoulders. "Hook," he said gently, "listen to me." Hook leaned in eagerly. "You," Blackthorn said, "are an idiot." Hook's face fell. "Captain." "A spectacular idiot," Blackthorn continued. "A once-in-a-generation idiot. A man whose idiocy should be studied by scholars." Hook sputtered. "But Gray," Blackthorn said, "is not a rebel. But he, and Private Alexander," Blackthorn added, "is not recruiting anyone." Hook opened his mouth. Blackthorn raised a finger. "Not one more word." Hook closed his mouth. Blackthorn exhaled. "Now get out before I have you flogged for wasting my time." Hook hesitated, trembling with righteous fury. "You'll regret ignoring me, Captain. You'll see. You'll all see." He spun dramatically and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Silence. Blackthorn stared at the door for a long moment. Then he muttered, "If Gray is involved, I'm transferring to the Navy." But the seed was planted. Hook was a fool. But even fools sometimes stumbled onto the truth, and Blackthorn had seen Blake shaken earlier, and Grey had been acting strangely, and the ghost did move like a gentleman. Blackthorn sat back down, eyes narrowing. "Damn it, Alexander," he whispered. "What are you hiding?" Grey was reviewing the duty roster when he heard Blackthorn's voice behind him. "Lieutenant, a word." Grey turned. "Sir." Blackthorn's expression was unreadable, which was never good. "Hook was in my office again," Blackthorn said. Grey exhaled. "What did he accuse Alexander of this time?" Blackthorn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Grey with the same cold, assessing gaze he'd used on Blake earlier. "He claims," Blackthorn said slowly, "that Private Alexander has recruited you." Grey blinked. "Recruited me? To the Sons of Liberty?" Grey stared at him. "Sir, that's absurd." "I know," Blackthorn said. "Hook is a fool." Grey relaxed a fraction, then Blackthorn added, "But fools sometimes see things they shouldn't." Grey froze. Blackthorn watched him carefully. "He said he saw the two of you speaking privately, whispering, conspiring." Grey's pulse quickened. "We were discussing the patrol schedule." "Were you?" Blackthorn asked softly. Grey held his gaze. "Yes, sir." Blackthorn stepped closer, not threatening, but close enough that Grey felt the weight of the moment. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I trust you, but I need to know if there is anything I should be aware of regarding Private Alexander." Grey's throat tightened. He thought of Blake shaking, Blake crying fire, Blake terrified of being hanged, Blake leading the Sons of Liberty without meaning to, Blake begging him not to betray him. Grey swallowed. "No, sir, there is nothing." Blackthorn studied him for a long, silent moment. Then he nodded. "Very well." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Grey." Grey straightened. "Sir?" "If Hook is right about what he saw," Blackthorn's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "I will expect you to tell me." Grey's jaw tightened. "Of course, sir." Blackthorn left. The door clicked shut. Grey stood perfectly still. Then, very quietly, he swore under his breath. Because Hook hadn't just seen them talking. He'd seen Blake shaking. He'd seen Grey comforting him. He'd seen Grey lean in close. He'd seen Grey say, "You're not alone in this." And Hook, mad, jealous, obsessive Hook, had interpreted it in the worst possible way. Grey pressed a hand to his forehead. "Damn it, Blake," he whispered. "We're in trouble." And for the first time, Grey wasn't sure if he meant Blake or himself. The captured Son of Liberty was dragged into the interrogation room and shoved into a chair. His hands were bound, his lips split, but his eyes were sharp, defiant. Blackthorn stood before him, arms folded behind his back. Blake and Grey stood behind the captain, flanking him like silent shadows. But Blake felt it immediately. This wasn't about the prisoner. This was about them. Blackthorn hadn't said it. He didn't need to. Grey sensed it too, his posture stiffened, jaw tightening ever so slightly. Blackthorn began. "Name." The prisoner spat blood onto the floor. "Go to hell." Blackthorn didn't react. "You were caught near the harbour, near the Dartmouth, near the Ghost of Liberty." The prisoner's eyes flicked, just once, toward Blake. Grey saw it. Blackthorn saw it. Blake felt his stomach drop. Blackthorn's voice stayed calm. "You know him, don't you?" The prisoner smirked. "Everyone knows the ghost." Blackthorn stepped aside, revealing Blake fully. "Does he?" the captain asked. The prisoner's breath hitched. Blake kept his face blank, but his pulse hammered. Grey shifted subtly, stepping half a pace forward as if shielding Blake without meaning to. Blackthorn noticed. He noticed everything. The prisoner's eyes darted between Blake and Grey, confusion blooming. Blackthorn leaned in. "Tell me who the ghost is." The prisoner hesitated, then smiled. A dangerous, knowing smile. "Oh, I know who he is," he said softly. I know exactly who he is. Blake's heart stopped. Gray's hand twitched toward his sword. Blackthorn's eyes sharpened like a blade. Then say it, the captain commanded. The prisoner looked straight at Blake. Blake felt the world tilt. Then the prisoner said, loud and clear, "It's Lieutenant Gray." Gray's eyes widened. "What?" Blackthorn didn't blink. Blake nearly collapsed with relief. The prisoner grinned wider. Tall, lean, moves like a gentleman, knows your patrols, knows your officers, knows your weaknesses. It's him. Gray stared at the man, stunned. "I've never—" Blackthorn raised a hand. Gray fell silent. The captain turned to Blake. "Private Alexander," he said calmly, "do you agree with this assessment?" Blake froze. This was the real test. If he denied too quickly, suspicious. If he agreed, he condemned Gray. If he hesitated, he condemned himself. Gray's eyes met his, a silent plea, a silent warning, a silent trust. Blake swallowed. "Sir, I don't believe Lieutenant Gray is the ghost." Blackthorn watched him like a hawk. "And why not?" Blake forced his voice steady. "Because he's loyal, and because the ghost is a criminal." Gray exhaled, barely. Blackthorn turned back to the prisoner. "You're lying." The prisoner shrugged. "Believe what you want." Blackthorn nodded to the guards. "Take him away." The man was dragged out, still smiling. The door slammed. Silence. Blackthorn turned slowly to Blake and Gray, his expression unreadable. "Interesting reactions," he said softly. Blake's blood ran cold. Gray's jaw clenched. Blackthorn stepped closer, eyes flicking between them. "I'll be watching both of you." He left the room. The door clicked shut. Gray let out a shaky breath. "He knows," Blake whispered. "He suspects." Gray turned to him, voice low and urgent. "Blake, we're running out of time." And Blake knew he was right. The next morning, the regiment assembled in the yard. Blake stood in formation, trying to look calm. Gray stood beside him, stiff as a board. Blackthorn strode out with a purpose that made Blake's stomach twist. "Men," the captain announced, "we have intelligence that the ghost of liberty will strike again tonight." A ripple of unease passed through the ranks. Blake's heart lurched. Blackthorn's eyes swept the soldiers, but lingered on Blake and Gray just a fraction too long. "We will be conducting a special operation," Blackthorn continued. "A trap." Gray's jaw tightened. Blake felt cold. Blackthorn gestured to the two of them. "Lieutenant Gray, Private Alexander, with me." They followed him into his office. Blackthorn shut the door, turned, and smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, a predator's smile. "Tonight," he said, "we will stage a false shipment of East India tea, a decoy, a perfect lure." Blake's blood ran cold. Gray's eyes flicked to him, a warning, a question, a plea. Blackthorn continued, voice smooth as glass. "The Sons of Liberty will hear of it. They will come, and the ghost will come with them." He stepped closer. "Your task," he said softly, "is to guard the shipment." Blake's breath caught. Guard the shipment, guard the tea, guard the trap meant for him. Blackthorn's gaze sharpened. "If the ghost appears, I expect you to stop him." Blake swallowed hard. "Sir," Blackthorn cut him off. "Is there a problem, Private?" Blake forced his voice steady. "No, sir." Blackthorn turned to Gray. "Lieutenant?" Gray's voice was tight. "No problem, sir." Blackthorn nodded, satisfied. Then he delivered the killing blow. "You two will be alone." Gray stiffened. "Sir, no backup," Blackthorn said. "No reinforcements, no witnesses, just the two of you, and the ghost." Blake felt the floor tilt beneath him. Gray's eyes widened, just a flicker, but Blackthorn saw it. He saw everything. He stepped back, folding his hands behind his back. "I chose you both," he said, "because I trust you." A lie, a test, a trap. "And because," Blackthorn added softly, "I want to see how you perform under pressure." Blake's heart hammered. Gray's breath hitched. Blackthorn smiled again, that same cold, knowing smile. You are dismissed. They left the office in silence. The door clicked shut behind them. Only then did Gray whisper, voice barely audible. He knows. Blake whispered back, he's hunting the ghost. Gray swallowed. No, Blake. He's hunting you. Night fell like a blade. Blake and Gray stood guard beside the stacked crates of East India tea. Nothing but sandbags inside, but the rebels didn't know that. Lanterns flickered in the cold wind. The wharf was too quiet. Gray leaned close. They'll come. Blake swallowed. I know. Gray's voice dropped. And Blackthorn is watching. Blake didn't ask where. He didn't need to. The captain was somewhere in the dark, unseen, silent, waiting to see who Blake really was. Gray's hand brushed the hilt of his sword. Blake, if they show up, you can't help them. Blake's throat tightened. They'll be slaughtered. Gray's jaw clenched. If you reveal yourself, you'll be slaughtered. Blake didn't answer, because he already knew the truth. Either way, someone was going to die. A soft whistle cut through the night. Gray stiffened. They're here. Shadows moved along the pier, masked figures slipping between barrels and ropes with practiced stealth. Blake recognized them instantly. Men he'd healed, men he'd led, men who trusted the ghost with their lives. One of them whispered, "Ghost, are you here?" Blake's heart cracked. Gray grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare!" The rebels crept closer, unaware of the trap. Blake whispered, "They think I'm coming." Gray hissed, "You're not." But Blake's eyes were already glowing faintly. Fear, magic, instinct. Gray saw it. "Blake, stop!" A musket clicked in the darkness, then another, then 10 more. British soldiers rose from behind crates, barrels, shadows, surrounding the rebels in a perfect ring. The rebels froze. Gray swore under his breath. Blackthorn planned this too well. Blake stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Don't move," Gray hissed, grabbing his sleeve. But Blake's eyes were locked on the rebels, terrified, outnumbered, betrayed. One of them whispered, "Ghost!" Blake's heart shattered. A soldier shouted, "Drop your weapons!" The rebels hesitated. Blake whispered, "They'll shoot them." Gray whispered back, "If you intervene, they'll shoot you." Blake trembled, torn in half. A figure stepped out of the shadows behind them. Blackthorn, silent, still, eyes fixed on Blake, watching, waiting, judging. Blake felt the weight of that gaze like a noose tightening around his throat. Blackthorn said nothing. He didn't need to. This was the test. A rebel reached for his knife, panicked, desperate. A soldier raised his musket. Blake moved. Gray grabbed him. "Blake, no!" Blake tore free. He stepped between the rebels and the muskets, hands raised. "Stop!" Blake shouted. The word rang across the wharf like a crack of thunder. Everyone froze. Gray's face went white. Blackthorn's eyes narrowed, triumph and horror mixing. The rebels stared at Blake, stunned. The soldiers hesitated, confused. Blake stood alone in the center of the trap, exposed, unmasked, choosing the rebels over himself, choosing death over betrayal. Gray whispered, broken, "Blake, what have you done?" Blackthorn stepped forward, voice low and deadly. "Well," he said, "that answers that." The wharf was frozen in a moment of impossible stillness. Blake stood between the rebels and the British muskets, hands raised, breath shaking in the cold air. Gray stood behind him, pale with shock. Blackthorn watched from the shadows, eyes sharp as knives. A rebel whispered, voice trembling, "Ghost?" Blake flinched. Another rebel stepped forward, mask slipping. "It's him. It's really him." A murmur rippled through the group. Awe, fear, betrayal. "He's a soldier. A redcoat." "The ghost is a bloody redcoat," Gray whispered urgently. "Blake, don't move. Don't say anything." But Blake's eyes were glowing faintly, blue fire flickering in the dark. The rebels saw it. They recoiled. Holy God! He's not human. What is he? Blackthorn stepped forward at last, voice cold and triumphant. Private Alexander, he said, step away from the rebels. Blake didn't move. Gray whispered, Blake, please. A soldier cocked his musket. That was the breaking point. Blake's controls snapped. Blue fire burst from Blake's hands. Not flames, but a shockwave of shimmering light that rippled across the wharf like a living tide. Lanterns shattered, muskets misfired, soldiers staggered back, blinded. Gray shielded his face, shouting, Blake! The rebels gasped, some in terror, some in awe. Blackthorn stumbled, eyes wide. Witchcraft! Blake grabbed Gray's arm. Hold on! Gray barely had time to say, What? Before the world folded. The wharf vanished, cold air became heat, wood became stone. The smell of the harbour became dust and candle smoke. They reappeared in a cramped attic above a Boston print shop, one of Blake's hidden safe houses. Gray collapsed to his knees, gasping. What? What did you? How? Blake steadied him. Teleportation. I'm sorry. I had no choice. Gray stared at him, horrified and breathless. You're a sorcerer. Blake looked away. Not exactly. The rebels materialized around them one by one. Blake had pulled them through the teleport in a burst of uncontrolled magic. They stumbled, coughing, disoriented. One rebel pointed at Blake, voice shaking. You saved us. Another whispered, the ghost is a redcoat, but he saved us. A third said, he's not one of them, not really. Gray stood slowly, still dizzy. Blackthorn saw everything. Blake nodded, exhausted. I know. Gray grabbed his shoulders. He'll hunt you. He'll hunt us. Blake's voice cracked. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Gray shook his head. You didn't drag me. I stepped in. The rebels watched them, confused, frightened, loyal, betrayed, grateful. One rebel stepped forward. Ghost, what now? Blake looked at Gray. Gray looked back, terrified, furious, loyal despite himself. And Blake said, now we run. The attic was cramped, dim and thick with tension. Dust motes drifted in the lantern light. The rebels Blake had dragged through the teleport stood in a loose circle, masks half off, faces pale. No one spoke at first. They just stared at Blake, at the redcoat, at the sorcerer, at the ghost. Gray stood beside him, still unsteady, one hand braced on a beam. He watched the rebels like a man expecting a knife. Finally, one rebel, a broad-shouldered dock worker named Harlan, stepped forward. You're a soldier, he said, voice low. A king's man. Blake swallowed, not by choice. Another rebel spat on the floor. You wear their coat. Gray stiffened. He was pressed. A third rebel, younger, trembling, whispered, he saved us. Harlan rounded on him. He saved us because he had to. He's been lying to us for months. Blake flinched. The younger rebel shook his head. He led us. He healed us. He warned us. He's a witch, someone hissed. Gray stepped forward, voice sharp. He's a doctor. He's a redcoat, Harlan snapped. He's the ghost, the younger rebel said. Silence. Blake felt every eye on him, weighing him, judging him, deciding if he was a hero or a monster. He forced himself to speak. I never meant to lead you, Blake said quietly. I never meant to be the ghost. I was just trying to help, to save who I could, to do what was right. Harlan scoffed. Right? You lied to us. You hid behind a mask. You fought with us at night and marched against us by day. Blake's voice cracked. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Harlan growled. Gray stepped between them. He chose to save your lives tonight. Harlan glared at him. And who are you to speak for him? Another redcoat? Another traitor? Gray's jaw tightened. I'm the man who watched him risk everything to keep you alive. The rebels murmured, uncertain, conflicted. Blake raised his hands, palms open. If you want me gone, I'll go. If you want me dead, I won't fight you. But I won't let Blackthorn kill you. Not tonight. Not ever. The younger rebel stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. He saved us. He saved me. I say we trust him. Harlan turned on him. You're a fool. And you're alive because of him, the younger man shot back. Another rebel nodded slowly. The ghost has never led us wrong. A third added, redcoat or not, he's one of us. Harlan's face twisted. Anger, fear, betrayal. He's a danger, he said. A witch, a soldier, a liar. Gray stepped closer to Blake, hand on his sword. He's also the only reason you're breathing. Harlan looked between them. Blake's glowing eyes, Gray's protective stance, the rebels' divided faces. Then he spat again. Fine, he said. We trust him. For now. He jabbed a finger at Blake. But the moment you turn on us, the moment you slip, I'll put a knife in your heart myself. Blake nodded. Fair. Gray bristled. You'll have to get through me. Harlan sneered. Wouldn't be the first officer I've killed. The room went still. Then Blake stepped between them, voice steady. No more fighting, not tonight. We need to move. Blackthorn will come for us. The rebels exchanged glances, fear, loyalty, uncertainty. But one by one they nodded. The ghost had chosen them. Now they chose him. For now. The alarm bell clanged through the barracks like a war cry. Soldiers spilled into the yard, half-dressed, muskets in hand, breath steaming in the cold night air. Lanterns swung wildly, officers shouted orders. The entire regiment buzzed with confusion and fear. Then Blackthorn strode out, silent, controlled, deadly. The yard fell quiet. He stood before them, coat whipping in the wind, eyes burning with a cold fury none of them had ever seen. Men, he said, voice carrying like a blade, we have been betrayed. A ripple of shock tore through the ranks. Blackthorn continued, each word sharp and precise. The ghost of liberty is not a myth. He is not a rumor. He is not a shadow. He paused. He is one of our own. Gasps, murmurs, a few curses. Blackthorn raised a hand. And he has taken Lieutenant Gray. The yard erupted. What? Gray? Impossible. Sir, surely. Blackthorn's voice cut through them like thunder. Silence. The regiment obeyed instantly. Blackthorn's jaw tightened. Private Alexander is the ghost of liberty. He has used witchcraft to escape custody. He has abducted Lieutenant Gray, and he is now in league with rebel forces. The soldiers stared, stunned. Then, a shriek split the air. I knew it! Hook barreled into the yard, hair wild, coat flapping, eyes blazing with manic triumph. I told you, he screamed, pointing wildly at the empty air. I told you he was a witch. I told you he was a traitor. I told you he was the ghost. Blackthorn didn't stop him. He let Hook rant, because the chaos served him. Hook spun to the soldiers. He should be hanged, burnt, shot, all three. Some soldiers recoiled, others nodded grimly. Hook jabbed a finger toward the harbour. He's out there, with the rebels, with Gray. He's corrupted him, turned him, seduced him with witchcraft. Blackthorn finally stepped forward. Enough! Hook froze mid-rant. Blackthorn's voice was quiet, too quiet. Private Alexander will be captured alive. Hook sputtered. Alive! Alive! Captain, he's a witch. Blackthorn's eyes snapped to him. Hook shut up instantly. Blackthorn addressed the regiment again. Lieutenant Gray is loyal. He has been taken against his will. We will retrieve him. A murmur of relief swept through the ranks. Blackthorn's voice hardened. And we will bring Alexander to justice. He turned to his officers. Arm the men, prepare the boats, we hunt at dawn. Hook threw his arms up. Dawn? Why not now? He's out there. Blackthorn rounded on him. Because, he said softly, I want him to think he has time. Hook blinked. Blackthorn's eyes gleamed with cold strategy. And because when we strike, we will strike with precision. He faced the regiment. Tonight, you sleep with your muskets loaded. At first light, we march. The soldiers straightened, fear turning into grim determination. Hook, trembling with excitement, whispered, He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. Blackthorn didn't look at him. He looked at the dark horizon, at the city, at the place Blake had vanished. And he whispered, so only the night could hear, Run, Alexander. Run as far as you can. His eyes narrowed. I will still find you. The attic was still buzzing with rebel whispers when Gray grabbed Blake's arm and pulled him into the narrow stairwell. Blake, Gray hissed, we need to talk, now. Blake followed him down 2 steps, away from the rebel's ears. The lantern light flickered over Gray's face, pale, furious, scared. Gray didn't waste time. We have to leave Boston. Blake blinked. What? Gray's voice was sharp. Blackthorn saw everything, the magic, the rebels, me with you. He thinks I've defected. He thinks you've corrupted me. He'll hunt us both. Blake shook his head. I can't leave. The rebels need me. Gray grabbed his shoulders. They need you alive. Blake pulled away. If I run, they'll think I abandoned them. Gray stepped closer, eyes blazing. If you stay, you'll die. Blake's jaw tightened. I've died before. Gray's voice cracked. Not like this. Blake looked away, throat tight. I can't just disappear. Not now, not when they're in danger because of me. Gray exhaled sharply. They were in danger because of Blackthorn, not you. Blake shook his head. No, because of the ghost, because of the myth I created, because I led them. Gray's voice softened, reluctantly. You led them because no one else would. Blake didn't answer. Gray stepped closer again, lowering his voice. Blake, listen to me. Blackthorn isn't just suspicious anymore. He's certain. He's mobilizing the entire regiment. He'll search every street, every cellar, every attic. He'll burn the city down to find you. Blake swallowed. Then I'll stay ahead of him. Gray stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You can't outrun an army. Blake's eyes glowed faintly. Fear, magic, instinct. I can try. Gray slammed his hand against the wall. Damn it, Blake. This isn't just about you anymore. He thinks I'm with you. If you stay, I'm dead too. Blake froze. Gray's voice dropped to a whisper. Raw, honest, shaking. I chose you tonight. I chose to stand with you. I chose to run with you. Don't make that choice my death sentence. Blake's breath hitched. Gray. Gray stepped closer, almost touching foreheads. Leave Boston, Gray whispered, with me. Just until the regiment stops hunting us, just until Blackthorn cools, just until we can think. Blake closed his eyes. I can't, he whispered. Gray's voice broke. Why not? Blake opened his eyes, glowing, haunted. Because if I leave, the ghost dies, and the rebels die with him. Gray stared at him, hurt, furious, terrified. You're choosing them over yourself. Blake shook his head. I'm choosing what's right. Gray whispered, and what about me? Blake flinched. Gray stepped back, voice trembling with anger he didn't want to feel. You're going to get yourself killed, and you're going to get me killed, and you're going to get every rebel in this city killed because you can't walk away from a fight you didn't even want. Blake whispered, I'm sorry. Gray's jaw clenched. Sorry isn't enough. Silence. Then Gray turned away, gripping the railing so hard his knuckles whitened. Blake, he said quietly, if you stay, I stay. Blake's heart lurched. Gray, no. Gray didn't turn around. I'm not leaving you alone to die. Blake whispered, you'll die with me. Gray finally looked back, eyes fierce, loyal, doomed. Then that's what happens. Boston slept uneasily under a thin veil of fog. Then the shouting began. Witch! Witch in the streets! Hook's voice tore through the night like a blade. Doors cracked open, lanterns flared, people leaned out of windows, startled and afraid. Hook marched down the cobblestones with a torch in one hand and a musket in the other, coat flapping wildly, eyes blazing with manic triumph. Behind him trailed a ragged mob of soldiers, militiamen, and terrified civilians, some drunk, some angry, some simply swept up in the frenzy. The ghost is a witch, Hook screamed. A redcoat witch, a devil in disguise, the mob roared. Find him, burn him out, search every house, bring the witch to justice. Hook spun, pointing his torch at a row of houses. He's hiding with the rebels, they're sheltering him. They're all in league with the devil. A woman gasped. A man crossed himself. A child cried. Hook grinned, wild, ecstatic, unstoppable. We cleanse the city tonight. The mob surged forward. Blackthorn rounded the corner with a squad of disciplined soldiers, the real regiment, not Hook's rabble. He froze at the sight. Hook leading a torch-bearing mob, civilians shouting, soldiers drunk on fear. Chaos spreading like fire. Blackthorn's jaw clenched. Hook! He barked. Hook spun, triumphant. Captain, I've taken initiative. We'll flush the witch out before dawn. Blackthorn stepped forward, voice low and lethal. You are not authorized to lead a hunt. Hook laughed. Actually, laughed. Authorized? Captain, the witch is loose. Gray is corrupted. The rebels are hiding them. Someone has to act. Blackthorn's eyes narrowed. Stand down. Hook raised his torch defiantly. No, the mob gasped. Blackthorn's soldiers stiffened. Hook's voice rose, shrill and righteous. You're too soft, Captain, too blind. I saw the truth. I saw the witch. I saw him use magic. The mob murmured. Fear, awe, hysteria. Blackthorn's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Hook, put the torch down. Hook shook his head, trembling with fanatic energy. No, not until the witch is dead. He turned back to the mob. Search every house, every cellar, every attic. Find the redcoat witch. The mob surged again. Blackthorn's face darkened, not with fear, but with fury. He had lost control, and he knew it. A soldier kicked in a door. A civilian threw a stone through a window. A militiaman lit a torch and hurled it onto a porch. Screams erupted. Stop! Blackthorn roared. But the mob didn't stop. They were past stopping. Hook raised his musket and fired into the air. For the king! For God! For justice! The mob howled. Blackthorn grabbed Hook by the coat. You're going to start a riot. Hook grinned, eyes wild. Good. Blackthorn shoved him back. You're done. You're relieved of duty. Hook spat in his face. You can't relieve me. I serve God now. Blackthorn's expression turned to stone. He realized something chilling. Hook wasn't just hunting Blake. He was hunting anyone who looked like a witch, anyone who looked suspicious, anyone who got in his way. This wasn't a manhunt. It was a purge. Back in the attic, Blake froze as the distant roar reached them. Gray went pale. That's Hook, Blake whispered. He's leading a mob. Gray grabbed his arm. Blake, if they find us. Blake's eyes glowed faintly. They won't, Gray swallowed. What are you going to do? Blake looked toward the window, toward the flames rising in the distance. Whatever I must. Fog clung to Boston's narrow streets as the mob thundered through them, torches blazing, boots pounding, voices rising in a frenzy. Witch! Find the redcoat witch! Burn him out! Blake stood at the attic window, breath trembling as he watched flames flicker against the night sky. Gray grabbed his arm. Blake, don't. You can't go out there. Blake's eyes glowed faintly. They're hurting people. Gray's grip tightened. If they see you, they'll kill you. If Blackthorn sees you, he'll arrest me. Blake whispered, I can't let innocent people die because of me. Gray's voice cracked. You're not responsible for Hook's madness. Blake looked at him, haunted, resolute. I am now. And before Gray could stop him, Blake slipped out the window and into the fog. Gray swore and followed. Hook marched at the front of the mob, torch held high, eyes wild with righteous fury. There! He screamed, pointing at a small house with a candle in the window. A witch's sign! They're hiding him! A terrified family peeked out, a mother clutching her children, a father stepping protectively in front of them. Hook raised his musket. Out! Out! All of you! The father stammered. Sir, please, we've done nothing. Hook fired into the air. Witchcraft! You shelter the devil! The mob surged forward. The mother screamed, the children cried. Hook grinned. Blackthorn and a squad of disciplined soldiers rounded the corner at a run. Hook! Blackthorn roared. Stand down! Hook spun, triumphant. Captain, I've found them. The witches' allies. Blackthorn's face darkened. They're civilians. Hook jabbed his torch toward the family. Witches! Traitors! Burn them out! Blackthorn stepped between Hook and the house. You will not harm these people. Hook sneered. You're protecting witches now? Blackthorn's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. I am protecting order. But the mob wasn't listening. They surged forward, torches raised. Blackthorn shouted, Hold the line! Hold them back! His soldiers tried, but the mob was too large, too frenzied, too afraid. The family was seconds from being trampled. Blake burst from the fog like a ghost, cloak whipping behind him. Stop! His voice cracked like thunder. The mob froze. Hook's eyes bulged. The witch! Blake stepped between the family and the mob, hands raised. Gray skidded to a stop behind him, breathless. Blake! Hook shrieked. Kill him! A soldier lunged. Blake reacted on instinct. Magic flared. A shimmering barrier of blue light erupted between the mob and the family, a curved wall of energy that hummed like a living thing. Torches sputtered, sparks flew, the mob stumbled back in terror. The children stared at Blake with wide, awestruck eyes. The mother whispered, God save us. Gray grabbed Blake's arm. You're exposing yourself, Blake whispered. I know. Hook pointed at Blake, frothing with triumph. See, see, witchcraft, he's a devil, a demon. He raised his musket. Gray stepped in front of Blake. Don't you dare, Hook snarled. You're bewitched too. He fired. Gray flinched. But the bullet hit Blake's barrier and dissolved into sparks. The mob screamed. Devil! Monster! Run! No, kill him! Chaos erupted. Blackthorn stared at Blake, at the magic, at the shield, at Gray standing beside him. His voice was low, shaken, furious. Alexander, what have you done? Blake met his eyes, exhausted, terrified, resolute. What I had to. Blackthorn stepped forward. Stand down, now. Blake shook his head. Not while they're hurting people. Blackthorn's jaw clenched. You're forcing my hand. Gray stepped between them. Captain, please. Blackthorn's voice cracked like a whip. Gray, move. Gray didn't. For the first time in his life, he disobeyed. Blackthorn's eyes widened. Betrayal, heartbreak, rage. The mob surged again. Blake's barrier flickered. He couldn't hold it much longer. Gray whispered, Blake, we have to run. Blake whispered back, not without them. He turned to the terrified family. Come with me. The mother hesitated. Where? Blake extended his hand, glowing faintly. Somewhere safe. Gray grabbed the father's arm. Trust him. The family stepped behind Blake. Hook screamed, Stop them! Stop the witch! Blackthorn shouted, Alexander, don't! Blake closed his eyes. Magic surged. The world folded. Light swallowed them. And Blake, Gray and the family vanished into the night. The blue flash faded. The street fell silent. Where Blake, Gray, and the family had stood moments before, there was nothing, only scorched cobblestones and drifting sparks. Blackthorn stared at the empty space, chest heaving, eyes wide with something far more dangerous than rage. Heartbreak, he whispered, barely audible. Gray, his second in command, his most loyal officer, gone, vanished with the witch. A soldier approached cautiously. "Sir, what do we—" Blackthorn's voice exploded. "Don't speak to me!" The soldier recoiled. Blackthorn's hands shook, not with fear, but with the fury of a man who had just lost something he didn't know he cared about until it was gone. He turned on the mob. "This is your doing!" he roared. The mob froze. "You let him escape. You let him take Gray. You let a witch slip through your fingers because you were too busy terrorizing civilians." Hook stepped forward, trembling with manic triumph. "No, Captain, this is your doing. You protected him. You defended him. You let the witch grow strong." Blackthorn's head snapped toward him. "Hook," he said, voice low and lethal. "If you speak one more word—" But Hook didn't stop. He raised his torch high. "The witch is still here. He has followers. He has allies. We must cleanse the city." The mob roared in agreement. Blackthorn's soldiers tried to push them back, but the mob surged like a tidal wave, no longer following Hook, no longer following anyone. A man threw a torch onto a porch. A woman screamed. A militiaman smashed a window. A drunk soldier fired into the air. Chaos erupted. Hook spun in circles, trying to command them. "Listen to me, listen. I am your leader." But the mob ignored him. They weren't a mob anymore. They were a riot, a beast with no master. Hook's voice cracked. "Stop! Stop! I said!" Someone shoved him. Someone else knocked his torch from his hand. A third man pushed past him, shouting, "Find the witch!" Hook stumbled, stunned. He had lost them. He had lost control. He had created a monster that no longer needed him. Blackthorn watched the riot spiral. Torches, screams, gunshots, smoke rising into the night. His regiment was trying to contain it, but they were outnumbered, overwhelmed, swallowed by the chaos. Blackthorn whispered, voice hollow, "What have you done, Alexander?" Not angry, not furious, just broken. He turned to the nearest officer. "Get the men, all of them. We restore order by force if we must." The officer saluted shakily. "Yes, sir." Blackthorn looked back at the place Blake vanished. His voice cracked, barely. "Gray, come back." Then he drew his sword and walked into the riot. Hook stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by the chaos he unleashed, torchless, breathless, eyes wide with disbelief. He whispered, "No, no, no, no. You're supposed to follow me. I'm the one who saw the truth." A man shoved him aside. A woman screamed past him. A soldier nearly trampled him. Hook fell to his knees. "The witch, the witch, the witch." But no one listened. No one cared. The mob had outgrown him. He was no longer a prophet. He was just another man swallowed by the chaos he created. The riot had become a living thing. Torches swung like comets. Windows shattered. Smoke curled through the narrow streets. Screams echoed off brick and timber. Blackthorn pushed through the chaos with a squad of disciplined soldiers at his back, sword drawn, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. "Form a line," he barked. "Drive them back." But the mob didn't hear him, or worse, they didn't care. A militiaman hurled a torch onto a merchant's awning. Flames licked upward. A woman screamed from inside. Blackthorn shoved the militiaman aside and slashed the burning cloth down with his sword. "Get water!" he roared. His soldiers scrambled. But for every fire they put out, 2 more ignited. For every civilian they saved, another was dragged screaming into the street. Blackthorn's face twisted. Fury, grief, disbelief. This is madness. Hook staggered through the riot, hair wild, coat torn, eyes bulging with manic terror. "The witch is still here," he shrieked. "He's hiding. He's everywhere." He grabbed a random man by the collar. "You! Have you seen him?" The man shoved him away. Get off me, lunatic! Hook stumbled, fell to his knees, then scrambled up again, panting. Listen to me, he screamed at the mob. I am your leader. I am the one who saw the truth. But the mob surged past him, ignoring him completely. A woman shoved him aside. A soldier nearly trampled him. A drunk militiaman swung a torch at him, mistaking him for a rebel. Hook ducked, shrieking, Stop! Stop, you fools! I'm on your side! No one listened, no one followed, no one cared. Hook clutched his head, rocking back and forth. He's everywhere. The witch is everywhere. He's in the shadows, in the smoke, in the fire. His voice cracked into a sob. I saw him. I saw him. I saw him. Blackthorn shoved through a knot of rioters, knocking 2 men to the ground. His soldiers followed, forming a protective wedge around him. Clear the street, he roared. Drop your weapons! A man swung a club at him. Blackthorn caught it, twisted, and slammed the man to the ground. Another rioter lunged with a knife. Blackthorn parried, disarmed him, and kicked him back into the crowd. But there were too many torches, too many screams, too many people drunk on fear. Blackthorn's voice cracked with fury. This is not justice. This is not order. A bottle shattered near his feet. A torch flew past his head. A woman cried for help from a burning doorway. Blackthorn's face twisted, rage and heartbreak mixing like poison. Damn you, Alexander, he whispered. You've torn my city apart. Hook climbed onto a crate, waving his arms wildly. Listen to me, he screamed. The witch is still here. He's in your houses, in your minds. He's possessing you. A stone hit him in the shoulder. He yelped and fell backward. The mob surged past, trampling the crate, knocking Hook into the mud. He lay there, shaking, staring up at the smoke-choked sky. He's everywhere, Hook whispered. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. His voice dissolved into hysterical laughter, then into sobbing, then into silence. Blackthorn spotted Hook curled in the mud, shaking, muttering to himself. He approached slowly. Hook. Hook didn't look up. Blackthorn knelt beside him. Look at me. Hook lifted his head, eyes wild, unfocused, broken. He's everywhere, Captain, Hook whispered. The witch. The witch. He's in the fire, in the fog, in the shadows. Blackthorn stared at him, not with anger, with pity and something like grief. You've lost yourself, Blackthorn said quietly. Hook giggled, a high, cracked sound. He took grey, he took grey, he took grey. Blackthorn's jaw tightened. He stood. Get him out of here, he ordered 2 soldiers. He's done. As they dragged Hook away, the madman screamed, He'll come for you next, Captain! He'll come for you! He's coming! Blackthorn watched him go, face carved from stone. Then he turned back to the burning street and whispered, Let him come. The riot still raged behind him, torches, screams, the crack of musket fire. But Blackthorn stood perfectly still in the middle of the street, smoke curling around him like a shroud. He stared at the scorch mark where Blake had vanished, where Grey had vanished. His jaw clenched so hard it trembled. A soldier approached cautiously. Captain, orders? Blackthorn didn't answer. He couldn't, not yet. He knelt slowly, touching the charred cobblestones with 2 fingers. The stone was still warm. A faint shimmer of Blake's magic lingered in the air, a ghostly aftertaste of the impossible. Blackthorn closed his eyes. Grey, he whispered. His voice cracked. He stood abruptly, fury snapping through him like a whip. Form ranks, he barked. His soldiers scrambled, forming a shaky line amid the chaos. Blackthorn's voice rose above the riot, cold, sharp, commanding. This ends tonight. The soldiers straightened. The mob hesitated. Even the flames seemed to quiet. Blackthorn pointed his sword toward the burning street. Put out the fires, disperse the mob, arrest anyone who resists. A soldier swallowed. And the witch, sir? Blackthorn turned slowly. eyes burning with something far more dangerous than anger, resolve. Private Alexander, he said, voice low and lethal, is no longer a soldier of the crown. He sheathed his sword with a decisive snap. He is a fugitive. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Blackthorn continued, each word a blade. He is a traitor. He stepped forward, smoke swirling around him. He is a danger to this city. Another step. He has taken Lieutenant Grey. His voice dropped to a whisper, raw, personal, breaking. He has taken my officer. He looked up, eyes blazing. I will hunt him. The soldiers stiffened. I will find him. He drew his sword again, pointing it toward the night. And when I do, his voice was ice, I will end him. He turned to his men. At dawn, he said, we begin the hunt. The soldiers saluted, the riot burned, and Blackthorn walked into the fire like a man with nothing left to lose. The guard slammed the iron door shut, the clang echoing down the stone corridor. Hook hurled himself at the bars instantly. You can't lock me up, he shrieked. I'm the only one who saw the truth. The guard didn't look at him. Captain's orders. Hook's fingers curled around the bars, knuckles white, eyes wild. Blackthorn is a fool, he screamed. A blind, useless fool. His voice cracked into manic laughter. He couldn't catch a witch if it danced naked in front of him. He paced the tiny cell like a trapped animal, muttering, giggling, snarling. They think they can stop him. They think they can stop the ghost. But I saw him. I saw the magic. I saw the fire. He slammed his head lightly against the wall, over and over. I saw him. I saw him. I saw him. A lieutenant walked past the cell, nose wrinkling. God's sake, he's gone mad. Hook spun, pressing his face against the bars. Mad, mad. His voice rose to a shrill pitch. I'm the only sane one left. I'm the only one who knows what he is. He jabbed a trembling finger toward the corridor. And Blackthorn. Blackthorn thinks he can hunt him? Ha! He laughed so hard he choked. He couldn't catch a cold in winter. The lieutenant shook his head. You started a riot. You nearly burned half the city. Hook's smile stretched too wide. And I'd do it again. He leaned closer, whispering through the bars. Because the witch is still out there, and he'll come for you, all of you. And when he does, his eyes gleamed with feverish triumph. You'll wish you listened to me. The lieutenant stepped back. Hook's voice rose again, echoing down the corridor. Blackthorn can't catch him. None of you can. Only I know how. Only I saw the truth. He rattled the bars violently. Let me out! Let me out, and I'll bring you the witch's head. A guard muttered. He's completely gone. Hook froze. His voice dropped to a whisper, soft, eerie, almost childlike. I'm not gone, he smiled. I'm waiting. Then he began humming, a tuneless, broken melody, rocking back and forth in the dim light. The sound echoed long after the guards walked away. The dungeon corridor was dim, lit only by a few guttering candles. The air smelled of damp stone and old iron. Blackthorn walked slowly, boots echoing, face carved from granite. He didn't come down here often. He didn't need to, but tonight he had to hear it for himself. Hook's voice reached him long before he reached the cell. High, cracked, hysterical. The witch is everywhere. He's in the walls, in the shadows, in your blood. Blackthorn stopped outside the cell. Hook was on his knees, fingers clawing at the bars, hair wild, eyes fever bright. He didn't notice Blackthorn at first. He was too busy screaming at the darkness. Blackthorn can't catch him. Blackthorn is weak, blind, useless. Blackthorn's jaw tightened. Hook kept going, voice rising to a shriek. I could have caught him. I could have killed him. I saw him. I saw the magic. I saw the fire. Blackthorn stepped forward. Hook! Hook froze. Slowly, he turned his head. When he saw Blackthorn, he smiled, a wide, broken, too-many-teeth smile. Captain, he whispered, come to ask for my help? Blackthorn's eyes narrowed. I came to hear what you've been saying. Hook giggled. Oh, I've been saying the truth you were too afraid to see. He pressed his face against the bars. You lost Grey. Blackthorn's breath hitched, barely. Hook saw it. He laughed. You lost him to the witch, to the devil, to the ghost, and you'll lose more. You'll lose everything. Blackthorn stepped closer, voice low and deadly. You started a riot. You endangered civilians. You nearly burned the city. Hook shrugged. All in the name of justice. You disobeyed orders. Hook grinned. Because I was right. You attacked innocents. Because they were hiding him. You defied me. Hook's smile widened. Because you were too weak to do what needed to be done. Blackthorn stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then he said, very quietly, You're done. Hook blinked. Done? Blackthorn turned to the guard. Silence him. The guard hesitated. Sir, permanently? Blackthorn didn't look away from Hook. Just enough that he stopped screaming. Hook's eyes widened. No, 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 Captain, you need me. I'm the only one who knows how to catch him. I'm the only one who saw... The guard opened the cell. Hook scrambled back, shrieking. No, no, you need me. You can't do this. I can help you. I can... The guard grabbed him. Hook thrashed, screaming. Blackthorn, Blackthorn, listen to me. He'll kill you. He'll kill you next. Blackthorn turned away. Hook's screams echoed down the corridor. You're a fool, Blackthorn! A fool! A fool! A muffled thud. A gag. Silence. Blackthorn stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, evenly, like a man forcing himself not to feel. Then he said softly, Take him to the far cells. No visitors. No contact. The guard nodded. Yes, sir. Blackthorn walked away, boots echoing in the dark. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Hook's last muffled scream followed him anyway. The far cells were colder than the rest of the dungeon. Damp stone, dripping water, the faint scuttle of rats. The guard shoved Hook inside and slammed the iron door. The gag stayed on. The torchlight faded. Darkness swallowed him. For a long time, Hook thrashed and whimpered, muffled screams echoing off the walls. Then, slowly, the screaming stopped. Hook lay on the floor, chest heaving, eyes staring into the dark. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The dungeon was silent except for the drip, drip, drip of water. Hook blinked, and something in his gaze shifted. The wildness didn't vanish, but it sharpened, focused, turned inward. He sat up slowly, back against the wall, breathing steady for the first time in days. His voice, when it came, was soft and muffled behind the gag, but eerily calm. He reached up and tugged the gag down just enough to speak. His voice was a whisper. He's clever. He smiled, not manic, not broken, cold, knowing. He fooled all of them, even me. He tilted his head, listening to the distant riot fading above. But he made a mistake. His fingers traced the stone floor as though mapping something only he could see. He showed me what he is, a faint chuckle, and what he fears. He leaned back, eyes gleaming in the dark. Blackthorn thinks he can hunt him, but Blackthorn hunts like a soldier. Hook's smile widened. I hunt like a predator. He closed his eyes, whispering to the darkness. I know where he'll go next. A pause, a breath, a chilling certainty. And when I get out of here, I'll be waiting. He lifted his head toward the ceiling, toward the city above, toward Blake, toward Grey, toward the ghost, and in a voice soft as a prayer he murmured, You can't hide from me, witch. Then he went still, too still, the kind of stillness that meant the madness had stopped being loud and become dangerous. The riot had been pushed back to a simmer, fires doused, civilians ushered indoors, the mob scattered into frightened clusters. Dawn crept over Boston in a pale, exhausted haze. Blackthorne stood in the officers' room of the barracks, coat off, sleeves rolled, hair damp with sweat and smoke. A large map of Boston lay spread across the table, weighted down with musket balls. He didn't sit, he didn't blink. He worked, like a soldier, like a machine. Lieutenant Harrow entered quietly. "Sir, the riot is contained." Blackthorne didn't look up. "Casualties. 3 dead, dozens injured, several homes burned." Blackthorne's jaw tightened, but he didn't react. "Report," he said. Harrow swallowed. "Sir, Hook is secured." Blackthorne's voice was flat. "He stays that way." Harrow hesitated. "He keeps saying he knows where the witch will go next." Blackthorne finally looked up, eyes cold steel. "Hook knows nothing. He sees demons in shadows." Harrow nodded, relieved. Blackthorne returned to the map. "Alexander is a soldier," he said. "He thinks like one. He moves like one. He hides like one." He placed a marker on the harbour. "He will not flee by sea. Too exposed." Another marker on the main roads. "He will not flee by road. Too many patrols." He tapped the map lightly. "He will hide, regroup, tend to his wounded." Harrow frowned. "Sir, we don't know if he's wounded." Blackthorne's voice was quiet. "I know." He moved a marker to the north end. "Rebel sympathizers here." Another to the south end. And here, another to the docks. And here. He stepped back. "These are the only places he can go." Harrow stared. "Sir, that's half the city." Blackthorne's eyes narrowed. "Then we search half the city." He turned to his officers. "Divide the men into 4 units. Each unit sweeps a quadrant. No torches, no shouting, no panic. We move like soldiers, not like Hook's rabble." Harrow nodded. "Yes, sir." Blackthorne continued. "Any rebel safehouse we find, we take quietly. No bloodshed unless necessary." He paused. "And if we find Alexander..." The room held its breath. Blackthorne's voice dropped to a whisper, calm, lethal. "He is to be taken alive." Harrow blinked. "Alive, sir." Blackthorne's jaw tightened. "I want answers." A beat. "And I want Grey back." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Blackthorne ignored them. He pointed to the map again. "He will make mistakes. He is exhausted. His magic is unstable. He is protecting civilians and rebels alike. That limits his movements." He tapped the map once more. "He will go where he feels responsible." Harrow frowned. "Sir, that's not a military pattern." Blackthorne looked up, eyes burning. "It's a human one." He straightened, pulling on his coat. "At dawn, we begin the hunt." He paused at the door. "And this time..." His voice was ice. "I will lead it myself." Dawn washed the courtyard in pale gold. Blackthorne stood alone with Blake. The soldiers dismissed, the gates closed. The air was cold enough to sting. Blake knelt, exhausted, magic flickering weakly under his skin. "I'm here," he whispered. "End it." Blackthorne's jaw tightened. "You came alone." Blake nodded. "They're safe, that's all that matters." A long, heavy silence. Then Blackthorne raised his sword. "Any last words?" Blake exhaled. "Tell Grey, I'm sorry." Blackthorne's face didn't move. The sword fell. Blake collapsed, still, silent, gone. Blackthorne stood over him, chest heaving, breath fogging in the cold air. "It's done," he murmured. He turned away. A soft step. Blackthorne froze. Another. Slow. Deliberate. Wrong. He turned. A tall, hooded figure stood over Blake's body. A Grim Reaper, skeletal hands gripping a scythe, robes whispering in the dawn breeze. The soldiers who had been watching from the shadows recoiled, some crossing themselves, others dropping their muskets. The Reaper didn't look at them. It grumbled under its breath, irritated. Always dramatic, never just die quietly. It reached up and slammed the gallows trapdoor shut with a bored shove, then sliced the rope with its scythe. Blake's body dropped onto the platform with a dull thud. Blackthorn whispered, horrified. No! The Reaper knelt beside Blake. Up you get, it muttered. We're not done. It touched Blake's chest with one bony finger. Blue light flared, blood flowed backward, the wound sealed. Blake gasped violently and sat up, coughing. The soldiers screamed. Blackthorn stumbled back, eyes wide. Blake blinked, dazed. Ow! The Reaper stood, dusting off its robe. Then it turned toward Blackthorn. Captain, it said in a voice like cold wind, stop killing my magician. Blackthorn stared, speechless. The Reaper sighed, long, weary, annoyed. Honestly, you humans are exhausting. Then it placed its hand on Blake's shoulder. Blake stiffened, not in fear but in recognition. The Reaper's form began to dissolve into smoke. Blackthorn's breath caught. No. The smoke curled around Blake's body, sinking into his skin, into his bones, into his breath. Blake inhaled sharply. The Reaper vanished. Blake's eyes opened, glowing faintly with the same cold blue light. He whispered, voice layered with something ancient. I'm back. Blackthorn staggered. You died. Blake looked at him, tired, sad, inevitable. I do that. He stood, steady now, the Reaper's presence humming beneath his skin. Blackthorn whispered, shaken to his core. What are you? Blake met his gaze. Yours to fear, he said softly, and not your enemy. Then he stepped off the gallows, alive. And Blackthorn, soldier, commander, hunter, took one involuntary step back. The courtyard was silent, too silent. Blake stood on the gallows platform, alive again, faint blue light still fading from his skin. The Reaper's smoke had just finished sinking into him, leaving the air cold and humming. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, a soldier screamed. Another dropped his musket. A third crossed himself violently. And then the entire line of soldiers broke. They fled in every direction, tripping over each other, scrambling for the gates, shouting prayers, curses, and incoherent terror. Devil! Witch! God save us! He died and stood up. Boots pounded, gates slammed, the courtyard emptied in seconds, leaving only two men, Blake and Blackthorn. Blackthorn didn't run. He couldn't. He stood frozen, sword half raised, breath shaking, eyes wide with something he had never allowed himself to feel. Fear, awe, denial, fury, all at once. You, he whispered, you died. Blake stepped off the platform, unsteady but alive. Yes, Blackthorn's voice cracked. And you came back. Yes. Blackthorn took a step forward, sword trembling in his hand. What are you? Blake swallowed. Human, mostly. Don't lie to me. Blake met his gaze, tired, sad, honest. I'm not lying. Blackthorn's voice rose, shaking. Then explain what I just saw. Blake hesitated. Then he said it. The Reaper is my soul. Blackthorn stared. Blake continued, voice soft but steady. He's been with me for centuries. He's the reason I don't stay dead. He's the reason I heal. He's the reason I survive things no one should survive. Blackthorn's breath hitched. You're possessed. No. Blake shook his head. He is me, and I am him. We're the same being, two halves of one life. Blackthorn's face twisted. Disbelief, horror, heartbreak. And he won't let me die. Blackthorn stepped closer, sword still raised. Why? He whispered. Why come here? Why surrender? Why let me? He couldn't finish the sentence. Blake looked at him with something like pity. Because the city was burning, because Hook started a witch hunt, because you were hunting me, because Grey... He stopped. Blackthorn's jaw clenched. Where is Grey? Safe. Bring him back. Blake shook his head. I can't. Blackthorn's voice cracked. Why not? Blake's eyes softened. Because I'm leaving. Blackthorn froze. No. Blake stepped back, blue light flickering faintly around him. I can't stay here. Not after this. Not after you saw him. Blackthorn's voice broke. You owe me answers. I've given you the only one that matters. Blake's body began to shimmer, the first signs of teleportation. Blackthorn lunged forward, grabbing Blake's coat. Don't you dare leave me again. Blake looked at him, grief in his eyes. I'm sorry. The Reaper's voice whispered through Blake's mouth, layered and ancient. He is not yours to keep. A burst of blue light. Blackthorn was thrown backward. When he scrambled to his feet, Blake was gone, gone completely, gone forever. Blackthorn stood alone in the courtyard, sword shaking in his hand, breath ragged. He whispered, broken, Grey. Moments later, Grey appeared at the gate, breathless, confused. He looked around at the empty courtyard, the abandoned muskets, the scorch marks, the shattered gallows. Captain? He called. Blackthorn didn't turn. Grey frowned. Where is everyone? Why does it look like they saw a ghost? Blackthorn closed his eyes. He whispered, They did. Grey blinked. What? Blackthorn finally turned, pale, shaken, hollow. Grey. He's gone. Grey's breath caught. Blake. Blackthorn nodded once. Grey stepped forward, voice trembling. Gone where? Blackthorn looked at the empty air where Blake had stood moments before. I don't know. He swallowed, and I don't think I'll ever see him again. Grey stared at the empty space, then whispered, Blake, what did you do? By midday, Boston was buzzing like a kicked beehive. The riot had died down, the fires were out, the soldiers were shaken. But the stories, they spread like wildfire. Whispers in taverns, gasps in alleyways, hushed voices behind shutters. He died. I saw him die, and then he stood up again. Some said he rose with fire in his eyes. Others said a demon dragged him back from hell. Others swore they saw death itself kneel beside him. The tale grew with every retelling. The Redcoat Witch cannot die. He's immortal. He's the ghost of liberty, literally. He'll come for anyone who wrongs him. Mothers pulled children indoors, men barred their doors, even hardened soldiers refused to patrol alone, and the name Blake Alexander vanished from their lips. He became something else, the immortal witch, the ghost, the death taker, a myth, a warning, a nightmare. Captain, what happened? Why is everyone terrified? Blackthorn didn't turn, Grey frowned. Where's Blake? Blackthorn closed his eyes. He's gone. Grey's breath caught. Gone where? Blackthorn finally looked at him, hollow, shaken, changed. Wherever the dead go. Grey stared at him, stunned. But he's not dead. Blackthorn's jaw tightened. No, he said quietly, that's the problem. By nightfall, the entire city knew the tale. A witch who could not die. A soldier who rose from the gallows, a ghost who walked with death, a man who vanished into thin air, and somewhere in the shadows of Boston whispered only when the candles burned low, if you see a blue light in the fog, run. England, 1774. The rain had begun its soft descent over London when Angela stepped out of the little bookshop on Fleet Street, a parcel of paper and ribbon tucked beneath her cloak. The street smelled of wet stone and chimney smoke, familiar and unchanged. She, however, was not. She walked with steadier steps now. She spoke with more certainty. She lived alone, but not adrift. She had learned to survive without Blake. She had not learned to stop missing him. Angela paused beneath the awning, watching the rain bead and run along the cobblestones. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting the cool air settle her thoughts. A faint thump sounded behind her. She turned. A man stood at the far end of the street, half lost in the fog. His coat was worn from travel, his boots muddied, his hair longer than she remembered. He looked thinner, older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with years. But his eyes, those eyes, were unchanged. Angela's breath caught. Blake. He didn't move at first, didn't speak, only watched her as though afraid she might vanish if he blinked. Then he stepped forward. "I came home," he said quietly. Angela pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "You're alive." A small, aching smile touched his lips. "I try not to stay dead." A laugh escaped her, half disbelief, half relief, half heartbreak. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face, as if confirming he was real. He leaned into her hand. "I'm sorry," Blake whispered, "for leaving, for being taken, for everything." Angela shook her head. "You came back. That's enough." The rain softened to a mist around them. Blake took her hand, the same quiet ritual they had shared in a cafe long ago, and held it as though anchoring himself to the world. "What now?" Angela asked. Blake looked toward the fog-shrouded street, then back to her. "Now," he said, "we begin again." Angela squeezed his hand, and together they walked into the rain, not as doctor and wife torn apart by war, but as two people choosing each other again, in a world that had tried its best to keep them apart.